Hi there, listener, and welcome to the second in our series of podcasts covering the best snow sports equipment available for winter 2024. In our first instalment, we looked at the best skis, and today we're going to be looking at the best ski boots, with later episodes covering the best jackets, helmets, goggles, gloves, and socks. Now, before I go on, I'd like to put a shout out for Ellis Brigham. This special episode of the Ski Podcast has been made possible by them. Ellis Brigham are the winter sports specialists with 16 shops around the UK. We can find all the kit you need for this winter. Alternatively, simply go to their website at ellis-brigham.com and you can buy online now. Now, my name is Iain Martin, and today I'm joined by my regular guest and equipment expert, Al Morgan. Hi, Al. How are you?
Iain, I am great. I've just come back from skiing, my first trip of the season, and I'm pretty excited.
Given how the snow is looking out there just now, that makes sense. And, you know, I think we're going to be, if you can have such a thing on a podcast, giving some info hot off the press, because you were testing some equipment out there. But we'll come on to that later. Just tell me, though, you're in the Dolomites. What were the snow conditions like?
Well, we skied on one day when it was amazing. It was one of those dream days. Next day, pea soup, couldn't see a thing. So you know, you take what you can get, don't you?
Okay, but I guess if you're testing boots and skis, it's how it feels kind of underfoot. But as Obi-Wan Kenobi said, you have to let go of your conscious self and act on instinct. Now, today we're going to be looking at the best options at the top, middle, and entry points of the market, and explaining some of the key bits of jargon that you might need to know about ski boots without going too technical. Now, listener, if you really are interested to know more about ski boots and all of that jargon I mentioned, we have a ski boot special episode, which Al was on, also Colin Martin. And there is so much detail in there. I strongly recommend you listen to it, and I'll put a link into the show notes. It is actually the most listened to episode of the Ski Podcast ever. So lots of people are using it to find out more about ski boots. However, couple of points that came out of that podcast were function. Don't buy ski boots to match your outfit. I think, as Colin said, they're tools, not jewels. And secondly, you know, we strongly recommend that you work with a boot fitter. Again, Colin has a gift for phraseology. Like a wand in Harry Potter, the ski boot chooses your foot. Al, I wondered if you just had any views about, you know, working with a boot fitter as opposed to simply buying online.
What a difference. I mean, there is a hashtag that gets banded about the internet can't fit your boots, and it is so true. These are a technical piece of equipment, and they don't fit in the same way as a trainer. They're not the same sizing, so you can't really compare. So you have to go to a boot fitter, because this is a hard plastic shell. They can customize it. If you want the best performance, if you want the best comfort, if you want your ski boots to help you, go to a boot fitter, get it sorted, get a good footbed in there. It makes a big difference. Listen to what he says in that episode and go to your local boot fitter and support them.
I'm not just saying this because I want to kind of like support boot fitters per se. I'm saying it because it genuinely makes an important difference if you think about your feet. But I mentioned that ski boot special episode. You can have a listen to that. But when you're talking about the ski boots in this episode, Al, you're going to be referring to some of the, you know, the technical elements of them. So let's just tackle a few of those things now. I guess as simply as possible, a few things you're going to mention are going to be, I'm going to bring them up. Maybe you could just explain what they are. Firstly, cuff. What's the cuff?
So the cuff is the part of the boot that sits around your leg. But when we use the term cuff, we're typically talking about the plastic outer part of the boot that goes around your leg.
Okay. Is that different from the shell?
Yes. So the shell can be a confusing term. The shell really means the plastic part of the boot that sits around your foot, but the shell can also mean the whole outer plastic. But in this, we're going to talk about the shell as the bit around your foot and the cuff a bit around your leg. And this is about the plastic bit on the outside.
Okay, and then, you know, this probably sounds self-explanatory, but the liner is the bit on the inside, right?
Yes, so the liner is the padded bit that goes all the way down your leg, along your foot, over the top of your foot and up your shin. So the bit on your shin is called the tongue. And then, so that's a padded liner, and they're generally customizable, and that's what gives you warmth. That's what gives you comfort and fit.
Great. And you've already mentioned footbeds, but the footbed sits at the bottom. Your foot is resting on it. There are a lot of different footbeds. I mean, I've explained that correctly, right?
Yes, absolutely right. Don't get confused when you go and buy a ski boot that the piece of flat foam in there is what you're going to ski on. That is to take up the space of a normal footbed so you can try the boot on. That comes out, and then you get a shaped footbed that goes in there. Now, just remember that our feet are really dynamic structures. They give us shock absorbency. They give us power in sport. Skiing is a sport, but a ski boot is rigid. So you need that in there to help the foot deal with it, to help you deal with impacts when you're skiing, and to give you more comfort, more performance, and actually warmer feet because you get better blood flow. There's a whole load of research goes on around it, but it's definitely worth it.
But what you're talking about there, for example, I have custom insoles that were molded for me and created for me, you know, when I went to ProFeet.
Yeah.
Most ski boots are going to come with just a regular footbed. Would you be suggesting that most people get something custom, or can you actually just ski on the footbeds that boots are supplied with? Are they good enough for that?
The footbeds that come in a ski boot are not for skiing. They are just for trying the ski boots on. Some are a bit more shaped, but they are there so you can try it on in the shop rather than having to put a footbed in each. You do not have to get a custom footbed. There are pre-molded ones. And the price can vary. You may be going from, say, 30, 40 pounds up to, you can get medical orthotics, and these can cost hundreds of pounds. And if you use a medical orthotic, take that with you when you get fitted for footbeds. But when you're getting new ski boots, factor in the price of a footbed or take yours along. And often, really, you want to get new socks as well, because you want to get the ski boot fitted around the sock that you'll be wearing, because a sock makes a huge difference to how it fits.
Yeah, and that is a really valid point when you talk about like buying online. You're never going to understand that as well.
No.
Okay, so we've looked at the actual boot itself on the outside. Key around the outside are the buckles, and I'm going to bring this into play, BOA as well. Do you just want to explain kind of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, so if you just step into a plastic tube and a plastic shape around your foot, which is what the ski boot is, you need to close it. So it's closure systems. These have really been buckled, so a metal buckle with a ladder and a catch. And then around the top of the boot is something that we call a power strap. I'll talk about that in a sec. But yeah, so the buckles, it closes it. And then in recent years, people have combined buckles with cables. And you get, especially in the touring world, but we do see this in Alpine as well. But for this year, BOA is they make dial and cable closure systems for various sports, golf, running, all sorts of things, medical, like whether you're going to get some kind of device to support your knee or your back or whatever, you can have BOA closures on that. But for ski boots, for the first time ever, they have one with a really catchy title called the BOA H Plus I1. It's the strongest tension cable they've got, hence H Plus, and you can micro dial it in and out for tension. That's the I, the index out, and it's the first iteration, so the one. But yeah, it gives an amazing wrap around the foot, but it's only on the shell.
Yeah, well, we talked about the BOA binding system in episode 187 in a lot of detail, so you can listen to that there. But generally, in terms of buckles, then if it was a buckled boot, how many buckles would there be? We normally look at 4 these days, or 3.
Often it's 4. It depends on the boot. So if I just turn to my classic, I'll take a step back. So most ski boots that you think of have a shell around the foot and a cuff around the leg. Some ski boots will have a separate plastic tongue down the front. So you can have a 2-piece boot, shell and cuff, or a 3-piece boot, often called a cabrio boot, that has a shell, cuff, and tongue. Some will have 2 buckles. You can get ski boots with 2 buckles. Some will have 3, but most, especially in a 2-piece boot, will have 4 buckles and then a strap around the top, generally Velcro and static. Some have a claw strap.
So you mentioned before about the power strap, and you talk about a strap around the top there. Well,
yes.
Are they the same thing? I mean, every boot has that strap around the top, right?
The vast majority, it's a static strap and has Velcro to hold it in place where you've adjusted it. Some you can have a buckle combined with that. You see that in free riding touring boots. And some on the higher end models, which comes from the race world, has a claw strap. So you feed the webbing through a toothed strap and pull back on it, like if you've got roof rack straps, that kind of thing. But there has been a brand around for decades called Booster, which is elasticated. It's got a claw. You pull on it, and the elastic helps wrap the boot around your leg and gives you an amazing energy and rebound when you're skiing. Their patent expired recently, so we're seeing brands bringing out their own elasticated strap, which is fantastic.
So another thing that will probably crop up in conversation is walk mode in boots and something called Gripwalk. Do you want to explain what we're talking about there?
Yes. Okay. So a walk mode is a switch generally on the back of the boot. Sometimes it's on the side. So when you're skiing, the cuff is pretty much locked to the shell. You've got this angle, and when you flex forward, that gives you power through the boot, and that drives the ski. When you're walking, that means your leg's fixed in this position, so it's not a natural walking motion. So you have this lever to release the motion between the cuff and the shell. That's a walk mode. Some it's just for getting about town, but you see a lot more in free ride and touring boots. And really, you can call it a hike and ski switch, because that's what it's about. But if you're going to walk around, you want some kind of purchase. Typically, ski boots underneath have been hard, flat plastic soles, and that's what we call an alpine sole. That existed, and then there are touring soles for when you're going hiking around rocks and going up in big mountain, and that's curved and grippy, but you don't get the same power for when you're skiing. So Some Bright Spark came up with a combination of the two. So you get a curved, grippy sole, hence Gripwalk, and it gives you that more natural walking motion. But it has hard, flat plastic in it, so you've got drive, power, and most importantly, safety of release from the binding. But if you buy a Gripwalk boot and you've got an old ski, make sure that it's going to work with that ski. Most Gripwalk sole boots, the modern ones, you can swap that insert out for a standard flat alpine one if you need to, but you'll have to pay for that new sole unit.
Okay, that's really interesting. Now, there are a whole bunch of other elements of let's say, jargon and technical things, which I'm not going to propose that we go into here. We did cover pretty much all of them in that ski boot special episode. I'm talking here about things like canting, pivot, last, volume, Mondo point, which is just a ski specific way of describing your size. You don't need to worry about these sort of things if you're going to see a boot fitter. The one thing that I will ask you about is flex. In the descriptions of the boots, they have a number attached to them, and that relates to the flex, doesn't it?
Yes. Flex is a really interesting topic, and it can be very confusing. The easiest way to think about it, a lower number in flex. So for men, you might be looking at around 80. For women, it may be around 70, 65, 75. That is generally if you're new to skiing, or you're very lightweight, or you don't need that support and drive through it. And then it goes all the way up to typically 115, 120 for women, or 130 for men. You can go stiffer for racing, but that's where we'll stick, because this is recreational boots. And a stiffer boot is generally for somebody who's heavier, skis with more power, has more drive through the boot. Normally, men are looking at 120 as the top end. 130 is quite stiff. And women, you're looking at 105 or 115 as the upper end. It's not standardized. If a boot fits you well and it's a stiffer rated flex, you may be able to bend the cuff more than a boot that doesn't fit you well. And this is why we come back to, you need to go to a good boot fitter who's going to help you get in the right boot for you.
Okay, excellent. So we covered a lot of, the background. Hopefully, listener, you've got a sense of what we're going to be talking about. But before we go on to talk about your picks, your best boots for this winter, I just wanted to touch on sustainability. We mentioned this in the ski side of things. So much of the innovation we're seeing at the moment is in the area of sustainability, and we're covering that in every episode of these equipment specials. I wondered what the kind of big changes and trends we're seeing this year in terms of ski boots are.
This is the area if people listen back to the ski one, there's lots of new things happening in the space for skis. But for boots, sustainability story has been around for a while. Plastics have been recycled for years, and ski boots are made of plastic. So the recycled component, whereby an old ski boot can be taken and a new one be made from it, then that's been around for ages, using waste material. So when we spoke about a 130 flex boot, for example, you cannot make currently a 130 flex boot out of recycled material. Because the recycled materials coming in are a mixture of different plastics, we can't get the stiffness that we need for that kind of boot. So you're generally looking at up to, say, an 80 flex boot in recycled materials, and they can only be black. We haven't yet come up with a way of how to get colour in, because all the plastics are different colours.
Okay, that's interesting. And so that's reusage of plastic. And then, some of those old boots, that plastic can then be used and transferred to other industries. Is that right? Yeah,
absolutely. And it's used in lots of different things. So when you make a plastic boot, there's wastage, and those plastics go off and make fruit crates, markets when all the fruit's sitting in plastic crates, that gets made for that.
And other things that they're doing with ski boots that have reached end of life is that the liners can be used as well elsewhere in resorts.
Yeah, so lots of brands are recycling liners and being able to use a component of those in their liners. So Dalbello do things like this with their new Cabrio liners, which are pretty exciting. But actually, I only found out about this recently. So the plastic pads around the bottom of lift pylons, those orange pads that everybody sees around resort. So they've got foam inside them. They're now starting to use ski boot liners, recycle the foam out of those into those pads, and actually increases the safety of their pads. They are more efficient if they're made out of these recycled foams than out of the virgin materials they were making them from.
I wonder who tested that one.
Yeah, not me. I'm not being that tested.
And then the buckles themselves, those can be melted down and reused as well.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, that's metal. Metal's pretty simple. We can recycle that. A lot of liners had PVC in it, so we're trying to get away from things like perfluorinated compounds. So the vast majority of liners now are PVC free. Power straps, it was used really heavily in that strap around the top of the boot, that Velcro strap that we referred to. They're nearly all PVC free now. And this is brilliant that we're seeing this. But even in like the pull loops on tongues, we're getting recycled materials in there. They're just looking at these things in a far more holistic way now. This isn't a marketing story. And actually, it helps to bring the cost of boots down as well, because if they're using recycled materials in boots, they can drop the price. I think the manufacturing cost drops by about 7%.
I mean, we love those win-win situations. You see that in resort operations themselves, where post the energy crisis, a resort started to announce that they were going to run lifts more slowly if there weren't as many people using them. And it's imperceptible to the consumer, but it's a win because it saves energy and saves costs at the same time. Right, let's move on to the boots then. So we're talking about boots for winter 2024. We're still in 2023 at the moment, but we're talking about mainly this winter. So with the caveat that the ski boot chooses your foot, what are the 5 picks of your best ski boots for this winter then?
So I'm actually going to start at the bottom end and work up, because then at the top end for price, I'm also going to talk about touring. So at the lower end, I said the softer flexes, you're looking around kind of 80, 85 flex. Ski boots can be really expensive. When I'm talking about touring boots, one of the boots I'm going to cover is around £700. I mean, that's quite a lot of money, but touring is quite specialist. But at this lower end, if you're looking around the £300 mark, so 310 up to 320, there's Atomic, Salomon, the big brands, K2, all have boots in here. Nordic has a speed machine range. So this is they make lots of different machine boots, different widths, this last of a boot. So this sits in that middle category, that 100mm width across the forefoot. And then they're doing 85 boot. That's £320, but you get a lot of tech in there. Their liners are incredible. They use different kinds of plastics in the shell. They've got an infrared customization. So it's real techers in this boot for £320. It's pretty impressive. A great skiing sensation, but it is that easier flex. Somebody who's getting into skiing, maybe they've had one holiday already, they want to buy their own boots.
So Nordica Speed Machine is what we're suggesting. This is available for men and women?
Yeah, they do different versions for men and women. So when we're talking about flexes, often you'll hear me say a 115, for example. So when we're talking about flex, if it ends in a 5, it's almost always a women's boot. And if it ends in a 0, it's almost always a men's boot. But that's generally how it works nowadays.
That's just a naming convention by the brand.
And it's only pretty recently that this has happened. It used to be that everything ended in a 0. And I think because ski boot names can be really long, this is much easier than having to put women's, men's, whatever in the name. It just keeps it short.
And just to touch on this then, we talk about women's and men's. This isn't just about the decals and the colours. The ski boots are actually designed in a different way.
Absolutely right. So the easiest example of this is the calf on the back of your lower leg. On men, it's typically higher up the leg. On women, it is lower down. So the top of the cuff can be more sculpted for a lady's calf. It may have, we call it tuliping, so it's got a curve downwards at the top of the cuff, whereas men's will generally curve up at the top of the cuff. And that's to accommodate that calf in there. There's lots more going on, but that's a really good example. Most women's boots will have a different shape at the top, at the back.
Okay, excellent. So the Nordica Speed Machine, number one on the list. I'm going to put a link to that into the show notes as well. What's your second pick?
We're actually going with Nordica again, and this is because it's a very, very specialist boot. There are other boots in this range. Every manufacturer has a medium volume, medium kind of price point boot. If anybody remembers skiing from decades ago, you had some amazing rear entry boots. Nordica makes a rear entry boot. It's not new. It's been around for a few seasons. And this is called the HF. And the HF stands for hands free. There's a men's and a women's that I'm going to focus on. Price point, it's £430. They do 110 men's and 85 women's. They do other flexes. But for this category of skier, maybe you don't get on with a regular alpine ski boot, but this is so easy to get into. Other brands have tried to do rear entry in modern years and it hasn't worked. And Nordica have nailed it. Great adjustment, great fit. It doesn't have a power strap around the top on these, but you still get customization in the liner. You've got heat customization in the shell. So this is quite a big boot. It's 102 mil across the foot. It's high volume. I'm pretty sure I'm safe to say this because this boot doesn't exist yet, but they are coming out with a new boot called the HF Pro. So this is a narrower last. Don't get too excited. This doesn't exist on the market yet. This is a boot for winter 24-25, but this is the narrower last. The fit on it is amazing. They've got slightly different adjustment. It's just more techers. It looks really slim. It skis incredibly well. People think rear entry is not going to give you performance. The only stiffer boot sideways that Nordica makes next season is their race range. And this is a rear entry boot. That's pretty cool.
So that HF Pro that you mentioned, dare I ask, is that something that you tried last week when you're in the Dolomites?
Yeah. It is exciting. They currently make a model called the HF Pro, which is just their stiff HF. That is not the boot I'm talking of because they're dropping the Pro from that name. It is a completely new boot that they've got for next season.
So what you talk about here, the Nordica HF, medium level, it's a rear entry boot. And like you said, most people who've been skiing for a while think of, boots that came out around the 80s. So it makes it kind of sound, therefore, potentially dated. But you're telling me that the performance that you get from this boot is, as good at that kind of price point as you would see in anything else.
Honestly, it is I thought it was going to be a bit of a dog when I skied it originally a few seasons ago. I mean, I can't hide my emotions around that. You get in it, you go, and it's not. It's amazing. It's a big volume boot. Nordica themselves even thought that it was really going to be maybe somebody who's been skiing for decades. They're a bit older. They struggle to get into boots. But what we've seen in shops is that it's not that at all. Younger skiers are getting into it. They do men's, they do women's. It skis really well. The fit is brilliant, and it's so easy to get into.
Right. I mean, I think for a lot of skiers, that is a significant one. So, okay, that's a Nordica HF. So third pick then. If you tell me it's going to be Nordica,
no, it's not Nordica. I think this is about the best looking boot on the market, and I know others have a similar opinion. Do not buy a boot because of how it looks. Absolutely do not. But it's a bonus. This is a BOA boot. It's a women's BOA boot. Salomon have a new range for BOA called the S Pro Supra. All of them look pretty good. The standout model for men really is probably the 120, but this 95 women's is a beautiful boot. And when I was skiing with female testers using it last year, it's very impressive. The wrap around your foot without the bow, just in the liner, the way they've designed the liner, the wrap and hold around your foot is incredible. But then you add in this BOA dial closure that really can cinch the boot in. You get this whole hold, like a really firm handshake hold around your foot. You get an amazing reaction out of it. Fully customizable. You can heat mold the shell, the liner, loads going on. And actually the price point of £430, that's pretty good value.
Question about that then. So, it's a bit more expensive. Does that BOA binding inherently make the boot more expensive?
Every time. It's not even a question yet. Yeah, this season we are looking between, because some brands, K2, for example, Atomic, for example, they make a BOA version and a buckle version of a boot. So we can see exactly what the difference is. So you're looking somewhere between £40 and £90 difference for the same boot, just having BOA instead of buckles around the foot.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we covered that again in episode 187. There's specific reasons for that. But okay, best looking boot. That was the Salomon S Pro Supra 95 for women. That was number 3. What's number 4 on the list?
At this end, I want to focus on K2 here. K2 have really been upping their game in recent seasons. They've been working with BOA on snowboard side for years. So it's no surprise that they have BOA on their freeride boots, on their alpine boots. They're the only brand doing it on both categories of boot. But this is a piece boot. It's the men's Recon 120. And K2 just puts a lot of fun into skiing. They're not just your boring black. They've got color in it, but a massive technology. Their liners are really good this season. They call it multi-fit last. So they say it goes from 97 to 104, 106 mil. And this is to do with the heat molding in it. That's how you get the bigger end. Really, it's a medium volume boot with BOA that you can cinch down to wrap around your foot. But it's the little details that, the fact that they put claw straps on way more of their boots than other brands do. It's expensive. We love that they do that. In between the liner and the shell, there's something under the foot called the boot board. In there, you get little insets in the heel. It comes with a standard hard one for alpine skiing, but they give you a softer rubber one. So if it's a really hard packed day and you're finding it juddery or you're going to ski in the park, put that little bit of rubber in there. It sounds a very simple thing, but it makes a big difference when you're skiing. The thing that makes this Recon stand out is exactly where they've put that BOA dial. Some brands are further back along the foot and some brands are a bit higher, but this gives an insane level of wrap right along the length of your foot, right down to the toes. They've just nailed it. And this is the K2 Recon BOA 120. That's £550. They do it, you can get like the 95 for women, which is a bit cheaper, 440, but it's that 120 boot for men is so impressive.
Well, the way you're saying putting the fun into skiing, it sounds like as well, though, a huge amount of thought has gone into the design there, ranging from, those rubber inserts for your heels, the actual positioning of the BOA to get that, perfect fit around your foot.
Yeah. They've just got to absolutely bang on. When you're testing products, it's really important that you talk to other people that test it and you test it on more than one tester, because of what, a boot could work really well for me, but not work for 2 or 3 of the testers. And that's what's beautiful with the Recon series. The Mindbenders, they're freeride boots. Yes, absolutely. But this Recon boot for men just works on such a broad spectrum of foot shapes. They've just done really well.
Okay, and what sort of skier would you say that would be suitable for? Obviously, you picked out the men's there, 120.
So really, you are going to be an advanced level skier or an expert level skier for this. You can get stiffer boots from them, but for that, somebody who's got a number of weeks skiing under their belt, they know how to feel a ski carving. If you're talking about on-piste or they already ski off-piste, that's the kind of person that would be looking at a 120 boot. If you're 60 kilos, I'd argue you may be a bit too light for it. But if you're 70 to 80 kilos, you're an advanced level skier, this is going to be absolutely brilliant.
So this is going to be interesting. I'm going to kind of make a kind of prediction now, because you didn't say that had, touring pin options on that boot, and you haven't mentioned any touring at all yet. So is your 5th boot going to be something to do with touring?
Yeah, it's a tour specific boot. So I mentioned this.
Yeah, I got that right. Love that.
Yeah, exactly. And I haven't mentioned freeride boots, actually. There's loads going on in the freeride space. I mentioned the Mindbetter, Atomic have a brilliant new freeride boot. There's a lot going on in that space, but because of BOA and because of what we're seeing in the sustainability story around alpine boots, it's really worth talking about those. Touring. So in case anybody isn't aware, touring is when some silly people, myself included, put skis on their feet to walk uphill. Brilliant idea. But to do that, you need more movement in the boot. Touring boots have often given you great movement going uphill, but can be really soft and not that dynamic and power driven when you're skiing down. Atomic have a backland range of boots. They've had it for years. They're pretty narrow. They're very specific on who they fit. They have a new boot, and it's based on their prime downhill boots. So it's their medium 100 mil last. Touring boots normally have a short cuff. This has the same height cuff as the downhill boot. It's called the Backland Extend. They write it as Backland XTD. And the 120 version, it is incredible. I've seen people with long-standing loyalties to brands drop that brand like a stone to get into this boot. People who are in a lightweight racing touring boot have set faster times on this, which isn't a super light, because of the way that the cuff works.
And sorry, when you say set fast times, you mean uphill, right?
Uphill, yeah. Yeah, faster. Running up, we call it ski running or ski mountaineering, and they're going uphill faster in this boot.
That must be a combination of, you're saying it's flexible, but the weight of it must be a factor as well.
Yeah.
When we're talking
so for a lightweight touring boot, you're generally looking at around a kilo or under a kilo. This boot is 1,380 grams in a size 26 in the ski boots we're talking about in centimeter length of your foot. So size 26. It's got over 70 degrees. They class it 74 degrees range of motion. So here, when the boot is in a walk mode, that's how much, if you flex the cuff all the way forward and flex it all the way back, that range of motion, that's what we talk about. And that's 74 degrees. But what is special with this boot, if anybody owns their ski boots, have a look at them from the back, and you will see that the pivots, the bit where the cuff flexes forward and backwards when you're skiing relative to the shell, those bolts or rivets that are there are not at the same level horizontally. And also they aren't parallel. They are canted in, as in they're angled in. And touring boots have the same arrangement. So you try and flex something that has offset pivots, it won't move that freely. This is completely parallel. So if you put a spirit level between those holes, it will be level, and they're completely parallel vertically. And the range of motion, I've seen people go into walk mode and fall over in this boot. It is so free, and that is what is special about it. And then it skis. It's a 120 flex, and it feels pretty close to a 120 flex downhill boot. Part of that is because it's got a tall cuff, Tech materials. Yeah, it's pretty impressive. But it's expensive, £700.
Yeah, I mean, £700 is expensive. I mean, when we talk about skis, we're talking about, touring skis as well. Have a feeling it was the Glen Plake Elan model.
Yeah.
You was it the Ripstick?
Yeah, and then you've got to put a binding on that. That's $720.
Yeah, but we talk about weight, etc. But if you're someone who's doing a lot of touring and taking it seriously, then this is the type of boot that you're thinking about. And you mentioned skimo there. It's going to become lots of people do touring already, and touring is becoming more popular. But ski mountaineering, is going to be a sport at the next Winter Olympics in Milan Cortina, and that's going to bring it even more into the fore as well. So I think we'll only see this, going further forward. I did want to ask you a quick question. So that sounds great. That's the Atomic Backland Extend 120. Now that's a full touring boot. We haven't kind of found space, and I don't want to go into it too much, but there's a hybrid option in between, isn't there?
Yeah.
Between like alpine boots and fully touring boots. So do you just want to give us a bit of a sense for what that is?
Yes. So in touring, you've got movement, this range of motion in the cuff. Downhill, you want to be fixed and have that performance, but brands call it a free ride boot is probably the easiest way to talk about it. So it is designed so it skis like a downhill boot, but gives you a touring function closer to a tour boot. They do not tour like a tour boot, and you do lose some of this downhill skiing performance. But as a one boot to do everything, that part of the market, there are some amazing boots. I specifically haven't featured them in here. That there are some fantastic boots for this season, but because the touring segment, things like that Backland XTD, things like the new Scarpa Maestrale RS give you such good skiing performance with amazing touring. If that's the way you want to go, they're really good to look at now. But yeah, hybrid boot is really a free ride boot.
To, I guess, clarify, the boot that I've been skiing on as of last winter anyway is an Atomic Hawks Prime Extend hybrid boot. So far, in my experience, it's worked brilliant for me. I've been touring in it, and I've done some pretty good off-piste skiing in it as well, where I really needed to be able to be completely, on the skis, and it worked perfectly for me.
Yeah, and if you're only going to do maybe half an hour's skinning uphill, that's a really good choice. They're heavier, but they give you a brilliant skiing experience, and they are very, very close to a regular downhill boot for how they handle performance skis on firm snow.
Okay, well, I mean, that is so interesting, and I love talking to you, Al. I know your knowledge is possibly infinite in relation to all ski equipment things. So to narrow it down, just to a few. But I think hopefully this will be useful for listeners because we covered different areas from your first ski boot to the absolute performance models on there as well. I really appreciate that. I just want to remind listeners that this episode of the podcast has been made possible by Ellis Brigham. They have 16 shops around the UK. You can buy all the kit you need there at their website, ellis-brigham.com. However, this would be one of those occasions where I don't actually recommend that you buy online. As Al said before, if you're getting a ski boot, you really need to have it fitted. So, go into one of the shops. There will be links in the show notes to all the boots we mentioned here today, but I still think that going into a store, is very important. Now, I enjoy all feedback about the show. I like to know what you think, especially about these new equipment episodes. So you can contact me on social at The Ski Podcast or by email theskipodcast@gmail.com. If you like the podcast, there's two things you can do to help. You can review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That actually helps other people find us. Or you can subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now, you might have found this equipment special just searching around. We actually have 197 episodes now to catch up with. And I had a look and 137 of those were listened to in the last week. So there's so much to listen to in our back catalogue. You can just go to theskipodcast.com, search around the tags and categories, and you're bound to find something of interest to you. Now, you can follow me at Skipedia, the podcast at The Ski Podcast. But for now, I'd like to thank Al for joining me today. We're going to be back again with our third equipment episode. We're going to be focusing on jackets. So I look forward to hearing what you have to say about that. But thanks so much for sharing all your knowledge about ski boots today.
Iain, thank you for having me on, and I hope it's been useful. But it's just really exciting talking about this.
As we clarified before, some of the information you're giving us is so hot off the press that it's not been mentioned anywhere, only tested last week. So that's what you're getting on the Ski Podcast. But finally, listener, thank you for joining us. I hope you found this episode useful. And until next time, goodbye.